So I'm going to talk today about work that was undertaken during the CHOICE study. So the CHOICE study is cervical ripening at home or in hospital, a prospective cohort study and process evaluation. I'll explain a bit about the CHOICE study, present some findings from a postnatal survey that we did, and then I'll hand over to my colleague Cassandra Yule, who will present another piece of work from CHOICE. So first of all, a little bit of background. Induction of labour now accounts for between 30 and 50% of births in the United Kingdom. So that's between 240 and 400,000 per year. We know that it affects experience of childbirth, but there's actually very little evidence about experience of induction of labour. Cervical ripening is now recommended as first stage of an induction of labour for most people, and it involves application of either a pharmaceutical agent, so that would be a pessary or gel, which is usually prostaglandin, or a mechanical method, which would be a balloon catheter or osmotic dilator, such as Dilapan, which are inserted into the cervical os to soften, shorten, and or open the cervix in preparation for labour. So cervical ripening is now offered at home for some people. They attend hospital for assessment and insertion of the cervical ripening agent, and then they return home, coming back to hospital when they're in labour or after a set period of time, and that's sometimes 12 hours and sometimes 24 hours. So the work we're presenting today was undertaken as part of the CHOICE study, and CHOICE was a multidisciplinary UK-wide NIHR-funded study looking at the efficacy, safety and acceptability of cervical ripening at home and in hospital. It's led by the University of Edinburgh, University of Stirling and City University of London, and we've got a fantastic team of people who've been working on CHOICE, which includes obstetricians, midwives, social scientists, neonatologists, statisticians, health economists. I've probably missed someone out, but a big team with a huge range of expertise. The main CHOICE study analysed data from thousands of inductions of labour, and that will report on the safety and the efficacy of the setting and the methods used for cervical ripening. But today we're presenting Q-CHOICE findings, which are around experience. So Q-CHOICE was the qualitative part of the CHOICE study, a qualitative process evaluation, and that has focused on women, service users, birth partners and staff experiences of induction of labour. And I'll talk about a postnatal survey that we did, and then Cassandra's going to talk about the case studies, which were interviews and focus groups. So the postnatal questionnaire-based survey that we did, this was an online survey, and we invited women and birthing people who were having an induction of labour at 37 or more weeks gestation to complete the survey. They were recruited via their BadgerNet Maternity Notes app, so that's an electronic maternity note system, through social media and on postnatal wards with research midwives. At the end of the survey, they were invited to leave a contact, and then that way we were able to follow some of those who completed the survey up for interviews. So the survey was open between February 2021 and April 2022. We included lots of questions around the views and experience of key elements of the induction of labour process. Satisfaction, sense of control and mental well-being were based on tested tools. So those included WEMWEBS, which is the Warwick mental well-being tool, the Labour Agency Scale and Henry, and the references for those are actually on the final slide. So you'll be able to, if you're interested in those, the references are there for you. The survey included fixed responses and free text, which allowed us to produce descriptive statistics and qualitative thematic analysis. So we ended up with 309 eligible responses from women who'd had an induction of labour at 25 NHS trusts and boards across Scotland, England and Wales. Only 36 of those had actually returned home during their cervical ripening, so that was just 14%. So with so few respondents returning home, obviously this impacted our data analysis. So we were no longer able to do statistical comparison between the two groups. But we do have descriptive findings from the women who went home. And in addition, those who left contact details were followed up for interview, and Cassandra is able to talk about those later on with the case studies. So the survey was long, and it's not possible to give all the findings, but I have summarised some of the key ones for you for tonight. So first of all, we asked a series of questions about decision-making around induction of labour. We found that 57% of the women who responded said that they either felt they had no choice or no alternative option about having an induction of labour. 66% felt that the options were explained in a way that they could understand, which of course means that a third of them felt that that wasn't the case, and exactly half felt that they fully understood what to expect during induction of labour, which again means that of course half didn't understand what to expect during their induction of labour. Thinking about the first question there, where we asked where women felt that they had no choice or no alternative option about having an induction of labour, this lack of choice was something that was often linked to induction of labour being presented as the only safe option for them. So this quote from a woman says, "It was never something I had a choice in, and I was told that if I didn't get induced, there was a high chance of my baby being stillborn because I was almost 42 weeks. So this scared me." And that was a very common thing around feeling that you didn't really have a choice about induction of labour, that it was the only safe option for you. Choosing an induction of labour had an immediate impact on birth plans for around half of our women. 48% reported that it changed their birth plans. The most common was being no longer able to use water during labour or birth, or being unable to use a midwifery-led unit. And again, I've got a couple of quotes here. So one woman said, "I would have liked a water birth, but was told this was no longer an option." And another said, "I was devastated I couldn't go home from my birth of my first baby." So moving on to cervical ripening and starting with the method being used, you can see here we ask questions about the discomfort by the type of cervical ripening method. So level of discomfort and ability to cope with discomfort varied between the different methods of cervical ripening that were used. Those who had balloon catheter reported more discomfort than those who had pessary or osmotic dilators. Although interestingly, ability to cope with discomfort was similar across all the cervical ripening methods. So when it came to going home or staying in hospital, only 39 respondents were actually offered home cervical ripening, and 36 of those, so 14% of our respondents, returned home. Not all maternity units offered home cervical ripening. And for those that did, there were often quite strict criteria. So for example, in many units, you had to be being offered induction for post dates, be low risk, and then there would be additional criteria that varied. For example, you maybe had to live within a certain distance of the hospital, or have someone at home, or have your own transport, and those type of things. So there were quite a lot of restrictions on who could be offered home cervical ripening. And very interestingly, most of the women, not all of them, but most of the women who did go home were from one particular maternity unit. And at that maternity unit, cervical ripening was the default. So everyone there who had cervical ripening returned home unless there was a really compelling clinical reason for them not to. So you can see that actually, even at the point of being offered it, the choice about this is being restricted. So with choice around place of cervical ripening being limited, some people who'd returned home felt that they didn't have a choice to stay in hospital, and then others who stayed would have liked the option to return home. Women varied in what they wanted. One woman said, excuse me, I've got a bit of a cold. One woman said, I was not offered the choice to stay in hospital after my balloon was inserted. This would have made all the difference with a toddler at home. But we actually had an almost identical quote from another woman saying that she would have preferred to have been at home because she had a toddler. So there appeared to be lack of choice about whether to return home or to stay in hospital. Circumstances obviously differ and personal preference is important, but that didn't seem to be being taken into account by caregivers. Women didn't usually have a choice about method of cervical ripening, despite the variation in the ways that they work and the discomfort levels between the methods. And the method offered was often decided by setting. So, for example, pessary was only available for those who stayed in hospital and balloon or dilapan for those who went home. And some women reported that they'd chosen either to go home or to stay in hospital, not because of the setting, but in order to receive their preferred method of cervical ripening. So, moving on to experience of cervical ripening in hospital and prior to labour ward. So we asked women about the time that they spent in the antenatal area before transfer to labour ward. And the median stay before transfer to labour suite was 22 hours. However, many were in the antenatal area for several days, and the range was 0 to 260 hours, so that's 11 days. The women reported that poor staffing led to significant delays in transfer to labour ward, particularly when they needed an artificial rupture of membranes or when they were in labour. So there was this significant number of women who really spent days on the antenatal area. We had 100 who spent over 24 hours, 42 who spent over 48 hours, and it really wasn't uncommon to hear women talking about having spent 3, 4 or more days. And then, of course, we had this one poor woman who was there for 11 days, and she said staff were pushed to the brink, which is why I was in the hospital for 11 days before my waters were broken. So this became problematic because the antenatal area was often described as inappropriate by the women. They reported being upset because they were separated from their birth partner. There was lack of privacy, there was lack of support, there was inadequate pain relief. And the delays, there was certainly a sense among the women that they were further down the labour ward waiting list because they were already in the antenatal area and they had a bed already, even although it wasn't a labour ward bed. So the lack of urgency during the induction of labour process often sat in opposition with the sense of risk that had been communicated as a reason for induction of labour. So unsurprisingly, the delays created a great deal of anxiety when women had been told that they were being induced because of an increased risk of stillbirth. So this woman said, when you've been told for 3 months that your baby could be in danger if you reach 39 weeks, and then you have to go beyond that because they don't have a bed for you, it's a very scary time. And that was a fairly common sentiment that we heard. So the delays that we heard about were this delay in initial admission to begin induction of labour, but also these compounding delays where women couldn't be transferred to labour suite when they needed their ARM or in established labour. The delays meant that some women laboured in the antenatal area and it impacted their experience, and it had some safety implications as well. So this woman said, I was told I couldn't have an epidural until I moved to labour ward, but I couldn't move to labour ward as it was full. I was only moved when I was pushing. And another one said, I was labouring behind a curtain, no privacy, others all around me. It was really hard to focus and stay calm and relax with no privacy of my own, no pain relief and no food. So a pretty unpleasant experience overall. Something that was very important to the women that came out throughout the survey was the support of their birth partner and their birth partner's experience. Birth partners were described as a really important source of support for the women, but unfortunately they were often treated poorly. They couldn't be present as much of the time as they and the partner and the woman wanted, and sometimes they missed the birth. So this survey happened during the COVID pandemic. We know that some restrictions were in place in some places, But we do also know that many units have policies that restrict birth partner presence in normal times during cervical ripening, often limiting it only to during visiting hours. And a common story around partners missing the birth was that a woman her cervical ripening would start to work. She would go into labour, and if that happened during the night, the partner would have been sent away home. She would be on her own, and she wasn't allowed to call the partner to come back in until they had a bed on labour ward. But of course, sometimes that all happened very quickly in the end, and there was a rushed move to labour ward, and the partner wasn't able to get back in time, which is absolutely devastating to miss the birth of your own child. And there's this quote from a woman who said, the birth partner, had nowhere suitable to wait, as we live 3 hours away from the hospital, and this made him anxious as he wasn't there to support me. It also made me anxious, as I knew he was waiting for news and worrying while he wasn't with me. And this was a woman who had initially booked at the midwifery-led unit, which was closer to where she lived. But because of an induction of labour, she had to travel to the obstetric unit, which was much further away. And that really wasn't taken into account by the staff, and nothing was done to support the birth partner within that. So unsurprisingly, unfortunately, the delays and the poor experience impacted safety and well-being. 41 of the women who left free text comments described their induction of labour as traumatic and or having caused significant long-term negative impact on their physical and or mental well-being. And this one woman said, "It was all so horrendous, I'll never have another child. It gives me anxiety thinking about it all. Before this experience, I did want more than one child," which is just absolutely horrible to read, isn't it? But on a happier note, there were people who had a good experience within the survey. There were fewer of them, but they were there. And the most important factors in a positive experience was support from kind, caring staff and being made to feel safe, valued, respected. Things that we as midwives have control over. And there's this quote that said, "My midwife was incredibly supportive throughout labour and birth. We felt safe and well cared for." So just in conclusion, induction of labour rates have increased, but planning facilities, resources for effective services don't appear to have. Genuine informed choice and information about what to expect appear to be lacking, and this results in poor experience of induction of labour and unsafe situations. Few women are having home cervical ripening. More research is needed about their experience, and certainly facilitation of individual choice about whether to go home or stay in hospital is important. And I've put the references at the end of the slide, so they'll be available later. And just to let you know that if you're interested in reading more about the postnatal survey, there's a preprint publication available as well.